I think we're ready to get started. Good afternoon and good day, everybody, for those that are joining online. It's a beautiful day today on Cornell campus, and I think our guest speaker brought up some of the sunshine. So she did? Yeah, okay. So before we get started, quick housekeeping announcement. Next week's seminar speaker, who is coming from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, unfortunately had some medical emergency, will not be able to come next week and has moved that visit to the spring semester. So because of that, we're going to cancel next week's seminar, so there won't be any class, and you should post that on Blackboard. The Tanner Fellows in the house? Yes. There's lunch afterwards with some students that signed up in the Tanner Fellows, so please stay in the room at the end of the seminar. It's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce this seminar speaker today, Dr. Olga Bolden-Tiller from Tuskegee University. Before I share more information about it, I think it's fitting that I say something a little bit about Tuskegee University. My first introduction to Tuskegee University is when I came to Cornell University in 1995. My advisor, Professor Ralph Christie, took me to the Professional Agricultural Workers Conference, which is held at the end of every year. I think they're celebrating their 80th anniversary, 80, not 8, 80 anniversary this year. You hear more about that. But he told me as soon as I landed on, in that ground, he said, Ed, remember that you're walking on sacred ground. It turned out to be an understatement. When it comes to Black education and history in the US, Tuskegee University is like the Mecca. This is the home of Booker T, George Washington Carver, Tuskegee Airmen, and there's such a rich legacy of people who have come from that institution that are now serving in different places around the world. They have continued that legacy throughout, and it remains one of those bastions of excellence in education and culture and enrichment and empowerment on things that we take now. Food justice is a relatively new concept, but going back 80 years, some of these issues were front line of what the university was addressing there. So we're really honored to have a speaker that's coming from a place that has such rich history. I'll say a few words to introduce our speaker, but in the interest of saving more time so that you can hear from her, I will refer you to the bio and you can go to the website, go on Wikipedia. Please read about Tuskegee University. You learn so many amazing things about that excellent institution. So our speaker today, Dr. Olga Bolden-Tiller, is the Dean for College of Agriculture, Environment and Nutrition at Tuskegee University, as well as the 1890 Research Director. She holds a BSc degree in Agricultural Sciences in Animal Sciences from Fort Valley University, and a PhD in Animal Sciences and Reproductive Biology from the University of Missouri, Columbia, where she matriculated as the USDA National Needs Fellow. She has had a long and distinguished career. To mention just a few, she was the coordinator of the Animal Poultry and Veterinary Sciences Program, Assistant Dean for Development for CAENS, State Coordinator for Alabama Youth Institute, Past President for National Society of Minorities in Agriculture, Natural Resources and Related Sciences, MANAS. And she's advised more than 60 students, illustrious career, many publications. You can learn more about her, by reading her bio, but please help me welcome our speaker today, Dean Olga Bolden-Tiller. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. So excited to be a part of this series for certain. This is the second time I've had the opportunity to come to Cornell, but of course, the roots of Cornell descend down into Tuskegee. As Ed shared, of course, there is a shared patronage and love for agricultural spaces. Some of my colleagues actually matriculated here as well, and so I'm very aware of the greatness of this institution as well. Today, I'll talk about a place for HBCUs and global food security. And I won't go into a lot of detail about global food security and really just talk a little bit about a place for HBCUs in global development in general. So global development, of course, is loosely defined as the actions of countries or organizations, the actions that they take to lend aid to other countries in need around the world. Here in the United States, we know a lot of that work is done by our organization, USAID. As late as 2018, the United States gave over $29 billion of foreign aid to support specific international programming and development in areas such as emergency response and developmental food aid. A lot of what we do around global sustainability and global development, of course, is centered around the idea of these sustainable development goals. And I go to these goals because really they are the epitome of what we can really do to take ourselves forward. And the one that I really focused on today is item number 17. And this is around partnerships for the goals. To make certain that we can actually achieve this goal, it's going to take partnerships and collaborations across the world in order for us to be successful. And this is where the historically Black colleges and universities come into play. And so when we look at the definition of the HBCU, or historically Black college or university, it's essentially any historically Black college or university that was established prior to 1964, whose principal mission was and is to educate Black Americans. Okay, and it has to be an accredited institution. Of the 4,000 institutions here in the United States, only about just over 100 of them are actually historically Black colleges or universities. And we know that we have some very elite graduates from these colleges and universities. I did not add a picture of myself, but I am a graduate of an HBCU. But, you know, I think a lot of the notoriety outside of the Black community really came with the election of Kamala Harris, first running for president and then becoming the vice president. And so it gave a sense of, wow, HBCUs can do this. But there are others, including Saul T. Wilson, who's a renowned veterinarian who worked for USDA APHIS and had a very intriguing history doing international work with foot and mouth disease and other works across the world. And then we have our USDA director who's acting, Deon. And of course, MLK, Martin Luther King, is also a graduate of an HBCU. So while this fantastical world of HBCUs seem to be so amazing, it really is just a staple that has been a part of the African-American culture for years. Now, when we look at HBCUs, there are a number of different point prides and things of that nature. One thing that we know is that HBCUs offer the opportunity for individuals to develop skills and talents. This isn't anything new and unexpected of a college or university, okay? They, of course, train young people to be able to serve both domestically and internationally, although a lot of times this training for the international piece has not really been recognized. But one of the things that's unique to the HBCU is that students can be, as, and I'll quote a recruiter from my home institution that I went to as an undergrad, Fort Valley State University, and he said it allows students to be very open to discussing issues facing people of color, but doing so that they can come up with solutions to make things better. And it can be done in a family type of setting so that there's no bias or worrying about what people are thinking of them related to race or other stereotypes. So this is a very, very important component and part of the HBCU that really resonates with African Americans as well as other people of color. When we look at the data, the National Science Foundation tells us that students of color who go to HBCUs are 15 to 20% more likely to first graduate, and another 15 to 20% more likely to go on to higher learning beyond the bachelor's degree. I tell people all the time, my mother has 4 daughters. 2 of us went to HBCUs and 2 of us did not. 2 of us are doctors and 2 of us are not, okay? One of us was smarter than the other because one of us is a PhD a poor hungry doctor, but the other was a money doctor, an MD. And so, but it makes a difference, and really it makes a difference because of the conversations that are had at those institutions. A friend happened to have texted me, he must have seen the announcement, but he happened to have texted me this morning a little clip, and it said, what's the difference between a student failing a test at a PWI, which is a predominantly white institution, and an HBCU? And it said at the PWI, the professor says, hey, that's tough, better luck next time. At the HBCU, it says, you better get your butt down here to my office. I know that you can do better. What were you thinking? And that is the difference. That is the difference between the two. And so, and we don't realize oftentimes how much that difference makes, especially with a lot of our African-American students who are first generational college students. They do need that extra push. They do need that extra, and I don't call it nurturing, but they do need that extra opportunity for preparation. I heart my HBCU, okay? As I mentioned, out of the 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, only about 100 are actually historically Black colleges and universities. Of those 100 schools, 50% of minority students who are African Americans are trained in STEM fields. This is very disproportionate, but that is where that success comes from. And so when people talk about and ask the question, are HBCUs still relevant in the 21st century? The answer is not only yes, they are still relevant, but they are also very necessary. When we look at the numbers and we look at the number of individuals who matriculate on and complete PhDs, MDs, law degrees, even who serve in our military forces in offices, 70 to 80% of them will have attended an HBCU. Okay, at least at the BS level. They may go on to get advanced degrees at other institution types, but it is that foundation that is so critical. And remember, when I talked about the uniqueness of the HBCU, it is that opportunity to really discuss what are challenges of people of color that need to be addressed, that can be done so to a solution. And so when we talk about global development, we are talking about problems and challenges that are often in places where there are people of color. So we know that of those almost 100 HBCUs, only about 19 of them are actually land-grant institutions. And so I'll talk just very, very briefly about the land-grant institution, because I think the land-grant institution plays a very special role in addressing global development, okay? And it has to do with the idea of teaching, research, and extension. All of those parts are really needed to really address global development challenges. So we know that land-grant institutions, the first ones were established in 1862 with the first Morrill Act. And then the second Morrill Act established the 1890 land grants, which are our Black land grant institutions. And so these were established to focus on providing the opportunity for education and teaching. And then the Hatch Act of 1887 went on to provide the opportunity for these institutions to have funding to support research. And then the Smith-Lever Act in 1914, of course, went on to allow for the opportunity for extension, which is where we really get into the work of doing the work in communities. Now, we do have another land-grant institution type, of course, and that's our tribal colleges and universities that was established as a part of the Improve America School Act of 1994. And so these institutions also play a very important role in work that needs to be done. This map just shows us all of the land-grant institutions across the United States. The red dots are our predominantly white institutions that were established by the 1862 Morrill Act, or the first Morrill Act. The stars are our 1890 institutions, the Black institutions, and then, of course, the 1994s are our tribal colleges and universities. And the distribution of them is not surprising. The red dots are all over the place in terms of the state, where we have Native Americans kind of concentrated is where we tend to find our tribal colleges and universities. And then down in the South, we have our 1890 land-grant institutions. And we know that these institutions were really started in states where African Americans were not allowed to go to the land-grant institution that was established by the First Morrill Act. And so when we take a look at these institutions, we see that they're down here in the South. Tuskegee University, I've circled here because I have to, of course. And so they're concentrated down here. But one thing about them is that they're concentrated in the area where we had a lot of slavery, as to be expected as to why students weren't allowed to go to the PWIs. But it's also very farming rich. This is our Black Belt area. And so this is a very agricultural area, production heavy area here. Now, when we look at the benefits of attending or participating or collaborating with an 1890 land-grant institution, these institutions tend to be smaller. So they have smaller class sizes. There's always a sense of community. Again, students have the opportunity to really live out loud with regards to their culture without being judged. And one thing that's become very unique, and I had a conversation with a graduate of Tuskegee University from the Caribbean, and he's like in his 70s, so he's very young, but he graduated what feels like yesterday. And so he came up to visit Tuskegee, and he was just talking about that he was one of the first people from his island to go to college, and his grandfather said, you will go to college, and the college that you're able to go to is Tuskegee University. Those conversations were had around the world. So many people of color who did not have the opportunity to go to colleges and universities elsewhere were able to come to Tuskegee University at a time when there was nowhere else to go. And so this has resulted in Tuskegee University, as well as other 1890 land-grant institutions, having a very internationalized faculty base. And then the opportunity for students to interact and have quality interactions with these faculty is also very, very important to this conversation today. Now, when we think about Tuskegee University, as Ed mentioned, we think about the great leadership of Booker T. Washington. We think about the Tuskegee University College of Veterinary Medicine, which has trained over 70% of all African-American veterinarians in the entire world. We think about George Washington Carver as the peanut man, but we know that he did so much more than peanuts, to the point that he led to a revolution that allowed us to feed the world. And then, of course, the Tuskegee Airmen, who are renowned and continue to be renowned to this day. But the legacy of Tuskegee University and Carver is beyond that. Here we have a picture of George Washington Carver meeting with Henry A. Wallace, who would later go on to become the Secretary of Agriculture and the Vice President of the United States. And his influence on leaders like Henry Wallace and others have really permeated very deeply into what we see even from the world of Norman Borlaug. So a long history and pedigree of mentorship and the import of that mentorship and its impact very broadly. Now at Tuskegee University, we are a big name, but we are a very, very small school. We're comprised of about 7 or 8 colleges and colleges and schools within the institution, including our College of Agriculture, Environment, and Nutrition Sciences, Vet Med, Arts and Sciences, Engineering, Business and Information Science. Tuskegee University actually had the first school of nursing in the entire state of Alabama. We also had to build the buildings at the university. So it has one of the oldest schools of architecture and construction science in the country. And then, of course, because most schools that were established around this time in 1881, they were normal schools and they were put in place to establish opportunities for African Americans to become literate. And so we have our School of Education. But the beauty of it is that because we're a relatively smaller institution, we work very integratively. And so we are able to accomplish a lot of things and address a lot of niche areas that larger schools may not have the opportunity to, just because they're too big, if you would. At the land-grant institution, we of course have as our mission and goals teaching, research, and extension, and we utilize the three of them in a very integrative way to address issues. When we look at our research faculty is very diverse. We have tons of extramural funding from a number of governmental organizations: USDA, NSF, NASA, USAID, USDI, private companies, and many others. And we have all of the research areas that everyone studies: plant and animal biotech, animal and crop production, alternative energy, economics, water and soil quality, as well as digital agriculture. But like I said, it's very nice that we're a relatively small institution because we get to do a lot of programming in an integrative way. A lot of schools have gone to an integrative model in the past couple of decades, but Tuskegee University really has always functioned in this way. We look to the words of George Washington Carver, who we know is a renowned scientist, and he wrote in his thesis, Plants as Modified by Man. And what he said was, man will be able to use the tools that nature has placed before him from a purely scientific basis, free from conjecture. So even back then in the 1800s, George Washington Carver really promoted technological advances and thought leadership and processes. When we think about technology, we look at this almost, I'm going to pretend this is like an original phone. I'm sure the original looks much older than this, but we think about the advances and the high throughput advances of the development of the cell phone, of the telephone, to what we have now today of the telephone, the cellular phone. But what's interesting, even though agriculture is like one of the oldest professions, one of the oldest sciences, we really have not utilized technological advances to really advance agriculture. In order for us to really address global development, we must adopt these changes in technologies. Again, even George Washington Carver talked about this, even though he was not aware of all of the different advances that might become available. But that need to advance science is going to be paramount in addressing issues. And we talk a little bit about here the sweet potato. Although Carver is known for the peanut, he did a tremendous amount of work with the sweet potato as well as soybeans. And so Tuskegee University has built on that legacy of Carver and some of his work with the sweet potato. Tuskegee University was among the first to actually develop and test transgenic, I'm looking at high protein content in sweet potato plants. Again, this is a staple product to a lot of countries where there are people of color, solutioning a challenge that is had when we look at the need for protein where there's not a lot of access to animal protein. Tuskegee University also played key roles in conducting biosafety and field evaluation of these bioengineered crops here in the United States. And so this work is very old work. So Tuskegee University has been in the game of innovation for years, and in the game of innovation on topics that influence and impact places where there are people of color. While other people were looking at other types of plants and seeds that was not the sweet potato, which is paramount to a lot of the nutrition necessary for different countries, Tuskegee University was looking at this. And of course, we would build on the peanut, where Tuskegee University scientists have identified over 500 resistant gene homologs in the peanut and constructed physical mapping of RGAs, as well as a number of other works related to cloning and molecular breeding associated with the peanut. All of this just to say that there's a lot of transformative work happening at the 1890 land-grant institutions that individuals may not be aware of. And then when we move on to looking at extension, the 1890 universities, including Tuskegee University, have a very, very unique opportunity to work with limited resource producers along this Alabama Black Belt. So the Black Belt extends across the entire South, but specifically when we look within Alabama, is these orange states that are traditional counties of the Alabama Black Belt. And it's in these counties and communities that we find some of the highest unemployment rates, topping up to 26%, the most uneducated individuals, very limited resource people without a lot of access to a lot of different jobs and opportunities. But it is these individuals that Tuskegee University and other 1890 land grants have as a mission to work directly with to help them overcome these challenges. And some of the challenges that plague individuals in these spaces are not uncommon to what we see in developing countries. We have developing communities here in the United States, and it's the 1890 land grant institutions that are addressing those challenges. And so it puts us in a unique position to be able to go internationally as well and really help address some of those international challenges that are similar that we've been able to find the answer to. And so this just shows some depictions of some of this work in motion, out working with farmers and producers. Now, when we talk about the internationalized faculty, here alone, we see these little circles that I've circled where we have programming, we have a number of faculty from a lot of these different areas as well. And so you can see, I mean, it's very global and very international. So there's a lot of expertise at the 1890 land grant institutions that can be utilized to address these global development challenges that we have. International work is not new. At Tuskegee University, back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, we had individuals going internationally, doing assessments, doing work. We see here T.M. Campbell, who's the first extension agent. He was a student and an employee of George Washington Carver. He actually assisted George Washington Carver establishing the Jessup wagon. And the Jessup wagon was the mobile unit that they went into communities to address a lot of the challenges that farmers were having. So essentially, they took this show on the road internationally and did some assessments and wrote a book entitled Africa Advancing, a study of rural education and agriculture in West Africa and the Belgian Congo. And so again, a lot of the work that we do in rural communities here in the United States, there are parallels internationally. And the 1890 community has decades and decades of experience that they can bring to the table. More pictures just show images showing work that we've done internationally, putting on trainings internationally, not just here, but really going into those communities, having our experts who are from those communities go into those communities and exact change. Interfacing with the decision makers and changing policy. In fact, as a result of some of the work that we've done here, we've actually established a PhD program in recent years that is the Integrated Public Policy Development Program, PhD program. This is more workshops that our faculty put on with biosafety trainings in different African countries. And really, the result of this work was increased awareness, dialoguing, and networking among African sciences themselves. So not just going in and teaching and providing information, but more importantly, allowing them to generate conversation and information themselves, giving them the tools to speak with lawmakers and journalists to really communicate out what these changes are, helping establish regulatory and policy frameworks as well, so on and so forth. In addition to the work that we've done in sub-Saharan Africa, we've done quite a bit of work in Asia as well. A lot of our livestock work that we have done has also been done throughout Asia. We do, as an 1890 land grant, focus on the livestock species goat, so caprine. And outside of the United States, this is a premier species that is well received and utilized for a lot of different things across a lot of these different countries. And so the 1890 land grant institutions have this expertise. We have a number of scientists and faculty who have been awarded a variety of different fellowships for their outstanding international work. So it's not that they're just working, and they're doing it in an excellent way. And so again, a lot to contribute to global development. I talked a little bit about Dr. Saul T. Wilson. He was actually a member of the very first class at the College of Veterinary Medicine. He had to go to war, though, so he actually graduated in the second class, or the second graduating class, because he had to go to World War II, sorry. But very instrumental. And he went on to work for the USDA. And as I mentioned, as a field veterinarian, he was very instrumental in the eradication of foot and mouth disease. And so he also taught at Tuskegee University. So again, these institutions have this expertise that can address a lot of challenges that we have globally. A lot of this work is not unique to Tuskegee University. We are awesome because we are Tuskegee University. But the reality is, as 1890 land grant institutions, of which there are 19, we are 19 strong. And it is across all of the 1890 land grant institutions that we find this type of expertise and excellence. In 2019, we had the establishment of 1890 Centers of Excellence. And they have evolved quite a bit in terms of the nomenclature and some of the funding for them. The one, though, that I want to really focus on, ooh, this thing is covered up, it's long, I can't remember the whole name, hold on. There we go. The Center of Excellence for Global Food Security and Defense. It's so long. It is a collaborative center of excellence with representation from all of the 1890 land grant institutions, but it is housed at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And already in just a short time, it has done some phenomenal work. It has over $3 million that have been invested from NEFA. There are 4 regional clusters in which the center is working. So different institutions from the different 1890s. They include West and Central Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, as well as East and Southern Asia, and again, East and Southern Africa, sorry. And again, we have lots of expertise from faculty from these areas. And then thirdly, when we look at the 8 interlinked priorities, they include agricultural productivity, reduction of global poverty, enhancement of global food supply chains, improving food safety, so on and so forth, climate change. Again, all of the things that we need in order to address our sustainable development goals. When we look at some of their outputs, when we look at students just within the first year or so of the program, had already impacted 38 students, had trainings or courses for over 25 of them, enhanced graduates, innovations in processing. And this program is continuing to grow and to receive funding. A lot of the work is centered around global education, food and nutritional security, agricultural disaster recovery, agricultural development, as well as animal and plant pests and diseases. And the wonderful thing about this is because we are leveraging across the 1890 land grant system in order to do this work, it really provides for a huge cadre of expertise that can be utilized. I don't know what happened. I'm clicking. They told me the clicker wouldn't work at the beginning, but the clicker is not working. I heard you. I don't know what happened. What? There we go. Okay. Recently, the USDA actually came up with a new grant, and it's called From Learning to Leading. And I only put this on here because I like the idea of this transformation, but I don't like From Learning to Leading. And it targets minority serving institutions being able to apply for some grant funds to do fabulous things that we do, because historically, the 1890 land grants and other HBCUs have been underfunded. So a lot of the work that they haven't been able to do has not been from lack of expertise or passion, but from lack of access of funding to support these works. And so this is a grant that'll kind of address some of that. But what I really like is From Teaching to Learning, because we have been teaching individuals to be leaders for years. Okay, we have been teaching individuals to be leaders. And even though they may not have been able to do a lot of the work while at the HBCUs, they have gone on to positions and been leaders that have really addressed global development issues. So I like to say From Teaching to Leading. So when we think about being leaders, we think about, okay, where are the dollars? Because this work needs to be funded. And so historically, I started my talk off talking about how USAID has put out these billions of dollars, but it hasn't traditionally gone to HBCUs for sure, and in a very limited fashion to minority serving institutions. So we look forward to the future of having this opportunity to take advantage of new initiatives like the new partnerships initiative that intentionally looks to lower barriers faced by non-traditional partners such as minority serving institutions, and to have them support prospective partners in overcoming the informational imbalance. Because a lot of the reason why you haven't had the success is because we haven't been provided not only the monetary resources, but informational resources to be a player in this space. This has become even more intentionalized with another initiative, the Minority Serving Institutions Program. And this allows minority serving institutions to bring passion and vision that can propel them in the work that we've already been doing with Indigenous people and people of color. So here we have a message from the administrator, Samantha Power herself. I'm letting her close this out because she said all the things that I don't have to say. The first thing she said in October of 2021 at the American Leadership to End Hunger and Malnutrition at Home and Abroad briefing was that there needs to be an initiative to tap into the expertise of the HBCU land grant institutions, and that HBCU and minority serving land grant minority service institutions have much to offer in the fight to end global hunger. But honestly, USA themselves had not done enough to recruit or enlist them, just had not been included. And that although it was a shame that it's taken so long to do this engagement in a meaningful way, it is being done because in order for us to really address our issues, it is going to take all of us, which takes us back to our 17th Sustainable Development Goal about partnerships for the goals, okay? And so this is Samantha Power here with the president of Tuskegee University, and this is where we're looking at a way forward. There was a signing of an MOU and just talks about how we can work together, not only Tuskegee University, but all 1890 land grant institutions and others to really move this thing forward. Also, in the introduction, Ed talked a little bit about our 80th Professional Agriculture Workers Conference. I always think a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so we have here just a shameless plug for folks who may be interested in attending the conference. There is a student component at the conference for presenting research. Abstract deadline is today. That's why I came today, so you can hurry and write those abstracts tonight, okay? And then, of course, we have here pictured Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks is actually a native of Tuskegee, Alabama. And I always like to end talks like this when we talk about helping people with the unveiling statue at Booker T. Washington, lifting the veil of ignorance. And his quote is, "A race like an individual lifts itself up by lifting others up." And that is all I have.
Thank you very much. We have time for a few questions. So if you can raise your hand, make your question very brief. Yes, starting from the back, introduce yourself and make. Can you speak a little bit louder?
Hi, I'm here from Southwest. My question was, I think first one, maybe.
Thank you.
My question was, do you notice a difference when you have Black scholars from HBCU go back to West Africa? In the field of development, do you notice that change in perception when they come back from the local people? Environment that like the historic white people.
I'm going to let Ed repeat the question.
He's asking when students from HBCUs go back into developing countries like Africa, do you notice a different reception than other people coming in from, other places going to work in development?
So what I heard you translate was, do African American students, are they received better in these developing countries?
Faculty and scholars in general, Black faculty scholars, when they go back to the field, do you notice a change in the perception that they receive from like UN or other white scholars?
So I feel like I'm not answering your question properly. So are you asking me, and I apologize, are you asking me about the reception of these Black scholars, the reception by the folks from the UN or in the countries that they actually go to? So when African Americans go into countries and when we go to these schools and our students show up in the developing countries, the people rejoice because it's people who look like them and they feel like there is a connection there and they too can be better understood. I mean, it's always great when someone comes to help you and no one is turning away help. But when that help looks like you and feels like you and there's some things you don't have to explain, it just hits differently. And that is what we see. And it also hits our students differently as well as faculty who have not been abroad previously, because it's one thing to help folks domestically, but it's another thing to go abroad and really realize how much opportunity that we have here and how much more there is to do that can be done. I mean, the best thing you can know is that you have a talent and you can utilize your talent to help someone else. So both ways, it does hit differently.
Yes. Next question. Yes.
Christopher Brown, thank you. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Highlighting all of the wonderful work.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. My question is, if there was an issue funding, if there was an issue that you think you can do more, what is that issue in regards to limestone, things like agriculture? What is that issue that the state needs to be more developed prosperity throughout?
Honestly, what I see and what breaks my heart a little bit, I'm not very sentimental, is how people are moving away from agriculture and I know how in the United States, how people of color and their experience with agriculture has been such a negative experience and how they've moved away. When I go to other countries, I really see the same thing. I see that experience from African Americans from 60 years ago, 100 years ago, a different origin, but still the desire to move away. So I think the first thing that needs to be done is an appreciation and an understanding of how important it is to be a part of agriculture and the land. And so I think before we can do anything else, that's the first thing, because that is our essence. And so that's the most important thing, because again, as I travel increasingly around the globe, I mean, I really see that distance, and especially in communities of color, and it's disturbing for me. Mm-hmm.
More questions? Yes.
John,
from Burundi.
my question is, you mentioned something about Native Americans and people of color, and I would like to ask if there is a connection, collective work between Black Americans and Native Americans to tackle some of the challenges that especially Black communities are facing?
So there is, and so a lot of the challenge that we see, and they're in different spaces. That's what I will say. One common challenge that we've seen that Native Americans have, Black Americans, as well as Hispanic Americans, is the unjust taking of land from all of those people of color here in the United States. It was done very differently for each group. For African Americans, it was legislature and law that was allowed to marginalize African Americans from not having access to dollars and funds for their land. Native Americans, it was just a blatant stealing of land, and that's just what it was. Even to the point that on the reservations, they don't actually own the land, so they are limited in what they can do with the land. And then Hispanic Americans, similar to African Americans, not through law, but just through stealing of land. And so there are lots of projects and programs that the three entities are kind of working on collectively to address those issues, because at the end result was the same. And so we do have an organization, for instance, called Minorities in Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Related Sciences. Y'all have a chapter here. But it exists on a lot of different types of college campuses. We also have some professional chapters, and we utilize that organization for discussions across the spectrum to really talk about what are the similarities and kind of where people of color have ended up with land loss, and how can we work now collectively to address it so that we have equity in that space.
Great. With room for one more question. Yeah, Kaylee.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. On the next gen project, and in terms of partnerships, which you mentioned, going forward, if you were to figure out a way to work with that's just one element of this. Do you have any suggestions going forward, how that might happen? What do you visualize?
So one of the things that I have learned working across the land grant systems, both PWIs and 1890s alike, is that partnerships matter and passion matters. And having that happen as a co-creation, despite who the lead might be, is what is going to be the driver of that. So we have to figure out, when we come together, I don't need to replicate and copy paste what you're doing. You don't need to replicate and copy paste what I'm doing. What are we both bringing to the table where we may have parallel issues or even overlapping issues? What can we all bring to the table? So when we are looking at partners for next gen, we're saying, what is the work that we can do? What are the challenges that we can address together as a collective, and let's move forward accordingly. Hence, I'm soliciting a letter of support from Cornell. So
Please help me thank